Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
It kept telling me that I was putting in the wrong number, which I wasn't,
Oh,
but I don't know why. I could get to the workshop one, but the evening reading one wouldn't work.
here comes Wendy back for some. Well, we are live, so we can start anytime.
Okay. So I'm gonna start. I'm in Kittery, Maine. This is my mom's summer house, and so I'm gonna start my reading. Whoops. Oh no.
People, if you pin video on the person who's speaking, or if you pick the speaker view instead of gallery view, you will have her as the primary picture and some of us in the corner.
I'm not sure this is the right version, but I will read it anyway. So Ghost, Kittery, Maine. The cupboard shelves are tilted forward, so the glass I put away slides off and falls. I only just catch it. My attention swims and I look, wonder why the other glasses on the shelf stay in place. Awake, still feeling the weight of the glass in my hand, my wrists hurt. I loosen them, stretch, and thread my arm between the arm and chest of my sleeping husband. This space is warm, and he cradles my arm even in sleep. When we removed the storm windows, putting on the screens, we noticed a windowsill was rotted. A woodpecker had torn open the siding in 3 places. Inside, the wood was dry rotted and termite-ridden. A bird flew out from its nest there. The camera on my phone lit up the darkness inside the holes. I sent the picture to the eaten away inside. I sent the picture of the eaten away insides to my mother 3 states away, who is learning again to walk after a surgery gone wrong. She owns this house. Yesterday, I closed the hatch back. The bike rack attached to it came down fast on my head. My glasses flew off. My head ached, and all day my brain stalled. I slept all afternoon in the seashore light of this room. The house was Ethel Matheson's. The books are his and Russell Cheney's. Shelves of treasures. A complete array of Conrad novels in decomposing leather I've never read. I found the Oxford Anthology of American Verse from 1950. Matheson selected and edited it. 1950 was the year he died. They called him Maddie. His introduction is written in a simple and clear voice. I'm moved by his voice, familiar, earnest. I trust him. A small Cheney portrait of him hangs downstairs. He leans back in his chair thinking, hands quiet on the desk, eyes staring off. The shape of his bald head resembles my grandfather's. As a child, I confused their images. I saw Granddad in the paintings. Before bed, I looked through the pages of the anthology. I read the Wallace Stevens, Amy Lowell, Robert Frost, Archibald MacLeish, and Whitman he chose. He wrote a book about Henry James, the author most important to me growing up. Brought in front of the House Committee on Un-American Activities, Gay, his lifelong partner dead 5 years, Maddie threw himself out of his hotel window, left my grandfather, not his relatives, this house, its contents, and his love letters. Granddad edited them with an intense purpose. Rat and the Devil, he called the book, because the men signed each letter with a small sketch. One was Dearest Rat, the other Devil. We are sleeping in the upstairs room that was Maddie's study. His desk still in the nook by the window, looks out on the meadow, then the bay. I arrange the pillow under my knees so my hip doesn't hurt, toss the covers off my chest, close my eyes. Once, a guest sleeping here told me the clock on the bureau started rattling on an evening without wind. She wondered about a ghost. They never appear to me, but the detritus of a person's life emanates something, a strange, decayed beauty, something lost that seems just out of reach, whispering. Soon my mother must sell this house. Farther east, dawn breaks earlier. The birds waken sparsely. Just now, the first sharp song pierces their earliest murmurings. And this one is called Awaiting COVID-19 Landscape with the Fall of Icarus. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Even as illness and death invisibly arrive, are in fact always arriving, the roadside brambles open their tiny, delicate leaves, and the trees bloom red at each twig end. The workers in Bruegel's painting are inattentive to Icarus drowning, lost in private preoccupations at Shiloh and Kelmno. The grass continues to grow. Human catastrophe is not important to the engine of life, gorgeously persisting. In autumn, my mother planted a dogwood tree whose buds must now be bulging. On the warm October afternoon she died, she stood, reached down beyond her walker, leaning to plant tulip bulbs in her front yard, not for herself, but to participate in the spring she knew would arrive now without her. And I'm going to read this one. This is called Devices. I stick the needle in and out of my cruel work. We are crowded under a small tent facing the lake in the rain, waiting for the next group of racing shells to skim across the water. The cold, the mud, the wet crowd press around us. I listen in on the conversation of two other crew mothers, younger than me, sitting nearby in their camp chairs. The nearest talks eagerly about her approaching operation, the devices she is ordering for afterwards, the bench for the shower, pressure stockings, sock hook, walker. I know about all these things. She is worried about the restrictions, not being able to drive. She put the list onto her Amazon account. I hear her smile. Her husband, ordering for himself, asks if she would like him to buy the old lady things in her cart. The women laugh. I keep my head down, eyes to my canvas, feel fear rising, think of my mother, her devices, the braces for the carpal tunnel, the extension for the walker to shift the weight from her wrists to her arms, the heaving wound vac, the stick with the lasso to drag the broken leg up to the bed. The grace and ingenuity she needs to live through this inevitable decline. The way my father, weak and unsteady with Parkinson's, found it easier to climb the stairs on hands and knees than to walk upright across the living room rug. Yeah, this is a kind of a long one. This is called The Architecture That Holds Us. Dad didn't want to die in Maine. Mom knew this, kept him there so he wouldn't die. He waited. Finally, they went home, not in August as usual, but in September after his birthday. When I came to visit, he was crawling on the floor. I asked him how he was, and he looked up and said he wasn't doing well. Sometimes he was confused. He took off his clothes in the middle of the day, couldn't sleep. When my mother was out grocery shopping, he wandered, needed me to help him pee. I held the cup beneath his penis, held his elbow while he struggled with his pants. On his birthday, I baked a cake and gave him a book his gaze told me he could not read. After I left, my youngest brother came from New York City to drive them to Rochester, helped heave what was needed, almost a household, onto the rack of the station wagon. He asked our dad if he wanted to tell him anything. At my house, midway, Dad could still walk up the front steps. I put him in our bedroom downstairs. My brother wrangled with my dad's answer to his question. Stop globetrotting, focus on your business, and continued to drive them back to Rochester the next day. At home, finally, Dad climbed the stairs to his bedroom. He didn't want to die in Maine, in his parents' house, although he took care of that house while it slowly crumbled, cared for it every summer, caulking and painting, rewiring and insulating, paying the seashore taxes. My mother may not know how this was his faithfulness to the place she loved, his devotion to her. But he would not die there. He could hardly speak a word anymore, but asked for palliative care. As a lung doctor, he had cared for dying patients and given that, the last offering, morphine. They put a hospital bed in his study downstairs. Nurses came to help my mother, brought a heaving lung machine. My youngest brother did not return in time to get his love. The nurse knew when Dad was dying. I went to get Mom and we stood at his bedside. He tried to speak. I thought he was suffering and plied his lips with morphine, silencing him. Go toward the light, Dick, the nurse said. I held his hand and remembered the way he held mine at my friend's funeral, quietly, unafraid of my despair. I held his hand, although he had already abandoned it. His last kindness was to die at 10 in the morning, in the ordinariness of a gray October day. The white t-shirt over his chest didn't lift again, and just after, his study filled up with light. He was everywhere in the light, filling the room that was most his, where he sat writing grants or struggling over tax documents, where he listened to Mahler and Strauss. The walls glowed. I looked at my mother and the nurse, my heart beating hard in my chest, but their faces were blank. Before a year was out, my mother sold their house. It was full of empty bedrooms, in the midst of fields and distant from everything. She didn't believe in ghosts, but twice was scared by his. They lived there over 40 years. At first, my father was unwilling to spend money on it. She had scraped 14 layers of wallpaper from the dining room walls, plastered and painted, sewed curtains and pillows, built gardens everywhere. One summer even, building a terrace from stones she hauled from fallen walls along the roadside. Her labor and her isolation there were what she surrendered to my father. She could not believe in his love, but cooked dinner for him every night, drank cocktails with him on the back terrace or in the living room, chatting to a man who almost never spoke. At her new house, his desk is in her living room. Her study is painted the same color his was. I don't know where she put his ashes. Without the house, I worry my father will be lost to me. But on a desperate night, he appeared, slipping his hand into mine. I think I'm going to do two more. Where she stayed. My fingers feel the space my mother's swollen knuckles bent into each leather finger. When we first arrived, we found the tulip bulbs and gardening tools she left out on the lawn, the plate with the crumbs from her lunch. That weekend, I washed and folded 7 loads of her laundry. The colors of her sweaters brightened me. I packed away her half-completed needlepoint, her abandoned hooked rug I want to finish. In the china bowl with stones, I will force paperwhite bulbs at Christmas. I hung the blue painting from her bedroom here in the room where she stayed. When I slide off her gloves, my hands smell of her sweat and lotions embedded in the wool linings. Sometimes when I worry, I remember. I hold Nina and walk her in the dark across the bare wood floor of her small room. Moonlight comes through the window in a slant square that dips down onto the floor. Her body fits snugly across my chest, her head at my shoulder. I am singing, and I can feel her body listening. Occasionally, I twist my head to check her. Her eyes are wide, even in her stillness. She watches the furniture shift as we move and turn. A car hisses past, and its light glides across the wall. When her body goes slack and surrenders completely into mine, I will know she's asleep. I'll wait, still walking, until she sleeps soundly. Slowly, I'll shift the bundle of her body across my belly. Keep walking, waiting for her to sink back deeper into sleep, her weight heavy in my arms. Then I will lay her on her crib sheet and press my upturned hand into the mattress to slide it from under her. I'll walk silently to the door and close it without a sound. Thank you.
Lovely.
Penny, those were so powerful and so real, so vivid. And I can understand they may have been difficult to read, but
Yeah.
boy, the power you did it with, the love you did it with, I truly appreciate.
Thank you. Thank you,
Yeah,
George.
Penny, those were beautiful poems.
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
And you read so well. Your voice is beautiful too.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing those with us. Those were really wonderful.
Thank
They
you.
are.
I feel like I've been hypnotized.
A great way to put it, Ross.
I'm in another world now.
What's up?
I'm going to start with some poems that have something to do in one way or another with the difficult times that we live in right now. This one is called Clock Repair in the Pandemic. Old Waterbury's and Seth Thomas's sat on mantles for years, chimes unrung, pendulums pending, hands held at 9:16, 2:23, or wherever the escapement let the last tick escape. Now people working from home with too much time on their hands look up to see neglect, things not taken care of, and they remember an elderly repairman with an apron, loop, and tiny tools, a shop in his basement. How good to see him in person, masked, peering up over his glasses. It'll be a week, he says. Business is good. The kids call home. Talk shifts out of chit chat and we hear the forced nonchalance. So how are you guys? When they mean, how are you really? And they're listening hard like we used to listen over landlines so clear we thought we could sense leaks in their fridge compressors or relationships. We're fine, they'd say, and we'd know it wasn't the whole truth and we'd buy it anyway because we wanted to. Today, we're nothing if not reassuring in the digital crackle. We tick boxes for shopping, gardening, movies. Not a word about closing in on 80 as fast as teens in a new ride, immune systems dozing off at the border stations, or old friends' names wandering away in nightgowns across autumnal cornfields. And yet, as much as it ever was, it's true, we're fine. This one has a conversation in the middle of it between two people in a car, and I'll try to, it's handled in typographically in the poem, but I'll try to gesture so you can keep track of it. In the pandemic, driving into the past and back. When we're at loose ends, we drive out into the country to little towns like the ones we grew up in and fled. A school, a few churches, one or two bars, a grocery, grain elevator, and farm supply, all surrounded by miles of cropland. We slow drive the streets, admiring yards daubed orange with ditch lilies, purple with phlox, dappled with shade from old oaks and maples. Prosperous looking little town, one of us will say. Look at that nice old Victorian. And the other, we could buy a lovely house here, cheap. Yeah, and do what? Go crazy in a year and leave. Still, people knew us back then and we knew them. They were what we had of life, however hemmed in, love, however reticent. Memory grounds us as we take a fraying street out of town, follow the compass through tall green fields on backcountry oil and chip roads that jog every mile or so toward home. Things change. The neglected dam at Edenville held back 80 million tons of water, generated a little power for the grid, a little worry for the powers that be. Then weeks of rain until the watershed has had it, can't hold anymore. The lake overtops the spillway, liquefies embankments. The dam fails and the flood tumbles, ranges free through low woodlands, streets, houses, rising, rising, rising. Nothing can stop it until it's satisfied. And even if you live downstream and have much to lose, that part of you still capable of awe will say, let it come, let it come. In the pandemic, the animals return. Shut inside, we see them flowing back into our lives like tide reclaiming a shallow bay. We have time now to observe male flickers do their shy, funny challenge dances at our windows. Fish flash in the clear canals of Venice. Boars wander a Barcelona 8-lane. Coyotes trot grandly through the loop. The man coming out of a long coma sees animals in the corner of his eye. Foxes and cats and shadows sit quietly in the room, keeping him company. Here are a few that are somewhat more personal. Campbell's tomato soup. Long before it was a series of prints on canvas that helped make Andy Warhol famous and rich, and long before it became something to sneer at by foodies and people who never cook at home, and long before it was renamed classic to distinguish it from the 18 other choices, including Disney Mickey Mouse, Healthy Request, Harvest with Basil, and Parmesan Bisque. It was something my mother served for lunch with saltine crackers, peanut butter, and milk, because it saved time for her to open a can, add water, heat it in a pan, and pour. No parsley garnish, no swirl of anything on top, just plain hot soup in a bowl in a tiny kitchen that looked out on a chicken coop, a vegetable garden, an unpainted wooden gate where tramps left marks to tell each other that if one came and asked, he would be fed. He would be fed. The sleep of gardeners. We didn't get along, Dad. I wasn't your golden boy. You weren't the father I needed, the one I sought for years. Trapped in your own problems, you didn't know how to help when I dropped an easy fly or a girlfriend dropped me. I was mouthy. Once you struck me hard. I felt dizzy and sick for days. You never hit me again. I hope you were ashamed. Yet when the frost goes out, I hoe furrows like we did together, plant seed, smell the breath of wormy, crumbly soil, then sleep the delicious, long, unbroken sleep, dreaming of vegetables that you taught me. Another gardening poem, The Gardener in Plot 23. As old-fashioned as the windmill that lifts its galvanized blossom high over the community gardens, he plants straight rows, keeps them weeded with a hoe and mulch, comes daily before it's hot. When first-timers show up on weekends, puzzled at sickly tomatoes and unthinned corkscrew carrots in their raised beds, he smiles, gives a little wave, and leaves the book of his garden open for them to read. There's some poems about work. This is the last section. 4 poems. Delivering the piano. Three men in jeans and sneakers arrive with dollies and skid boards, blue quilts and buckle straps, on 1,000 pounds of old growth hard maple and spruce, crafted into a 7-foot grand. Sorry. There's a crucial moment, the beast on its side, rear and treble legs secured. On 3, they pivot it down in one motion to keep the weight moving. Then quickly, someone fits the third leg into place, whacks it snug with a wedge and rubber mallet. Done. No music without these guys. Excuse me. I'm going to just do 2 more. His gift. All winter, the tools hung in neat rows in her cold garage. Saws, screwdrivers, tri-squares, among them her father's old hammer, the handle spattered with paint, the head so rusty she doesn't use it anymore. He had a temper, and she was frightened of him, but she liked to go out to his wood shop in the machine shed next to the barn, watch him build simple furniture, and hand him screws and washers from rows of dusty jars. Spring has come, her garage has warmed. She's cutting half laps and mortises. She's forgotten about the flaws in last year's projects. And when it's time for lunch, she leaves everything where it is so she can pick up where she left off. A marking tool, a mallet, and 3 chisels face every which way in the curled shavings, like 5 horses grazing in a windless pasture. And this is the final one I'll read. I spent most of my life with 1 foot in journalism, 1 in poetry, and this one kind of is about that posture. Learning the bones. That was the summer I packed poetry in a box and wrote obits, hundreds, from little towns like Neosho, Veneta, and Siloam Springs. I left Pound, Virgil, and the New Criticism arguing in the dark in a friend's basement and wrote plain words about plain lives in a sunlit 2nd-story newsroom full of desks, ashtrays, and phones. The dead had dates, idiosyncratic names, survivors who cared. No poem I've written before or since has mattered as much. I'd stay up late poring over the day's work. Accuracy, brevity, grammar, syntax. That was the summer I learned the bones. Thank you.
John, you belong in the pantheon of great plain-spoken Midwestern poets.
Oh, that was wonderful.
There,
Thank you.
Wonderful.
there is no higher compliment.
True.
I love your pandemic poems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Fabulous. You're better than Ted Kooser.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Don't go there.
That's good. Definitely.
Be realistic.
Oh, yeah. Love your poems.
Work, but it's really wonderful poetry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
You learned the bones.
And I
just-
want to welcome 2 more friends of mine from Urbana, Kathy Robertson and Matthew Murray, both poets themselves from the town where I live. Welcome. Great to see you both.
Been a long time, John, since you were with us. You know, at least, you know, last time I saw you was in Michigan, and I'm so glad to have you back.
Yes.
Thank you, Joyce. It is a privilege to be back.
it turns out that if I spotlight, then the person who's reading, if you look at them on speaker view, that's who you'll have.
Uh-huh.
If you pin, you can do it for yourself. But if I spotlight, like I'm about to do Helen, right?
Unmute, unmute.
I did you. You're unmuted. For some reason, I have
I
control of.
wanted to tell John that that was my first job in journalism too. I wrote obits and weddings. Who knew?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, me too. Oh, but come to think of it. Long time ago.
Those were the days the weddings were about 3 columns long. They had peau de soie and full description of the gown, the seed pearls, and you name it.
And those were the days when reporters wrote the obits instead of letting people put in whatever they wanted to say.
Right, yeah. Well, I'm going to start with a downer poem. It was written in the midst of you know what, and it was about as bad as I get. It's called Another Day in the Half-Light. The TV babbles on, robocalls peel and collapse into the answering machine. Snow piles over the car. The groundhog has seen his shadow. Dead friends leave messages scrawled in the dust. This one is called Blue Food, and Joyce told me there isn't any blue food. But blueberries are not actually blue, they're purple. But it's based on a dream. Blue food. I find myself sitting with strangers, a guitarist in a blue suit, others dark holes in the dream fabric, silhouettes against this inner light. I make a funnel with my hands, fill their bowls with granular blue food that catches light as quartz would, flickering and uncertain. One has a blue mustache, one blue smudges under his eyes. I want to make them happy, just this once. I know the lyrics of regret, sing a low-down husky melody, 5 beats to the line. They grin blue teeth and keep good time. I sing the blues. Okay, if you stay up very late, probably a 3 a.m. movie, you'll find this. It's called Vampire Brains from Outer Space, and it's about how they infiltrate our lives, but who could pass up a title like that? Vampire Brains from Outer Space. These brains look like our brains, with an abbreviated tail of a spinal column floating off the back. They clamp onto our brains because they want what we've got. They got here somehow, riding on the outside of a spaceship, maybe burrowing into the insulation, nestling on the bony skulls of the sleeping crew. They eat Comp 1 and 2, Intro to Psych, Calculus, Mickey Spillane and Taylor Caldwell, sky charts, astrology charts, formulas, the rules of volleyball, football stats, comparative anatomy, Dungeons and Dragons, how to drive a standard shift, to compute gallons into liters, Fahrenheit to Celsius, chivalry, pinochle, chess, the way to San Jose, Barbara Cartland, Dylan Thomas, Chaucer Poe, the Arapaho, Bruce Lee and Lenny B, Holding Hands at Midnight, the Parasite, Mistletoe, the Tango and the Samba, Heavy Metal, Chuck Corea, Michelangelo, Picasso, Herman Munster, Pinky Lee, A Pie in the Face, The Human Race, Poetry and Pork Chops, Potato Chips and Pizza, The First Kiss, The First Taste of Ice Cream, the smell of grass drying on a summer afternoon, a white steeple against a blue sky, cows grazing in the pasture, the sensual pull of soft fingers, the wind through pine trees and apple orchards, stone walls that mark the edge, the faint echo of church bells, a bagpipe skirl from a faraway ridge, a mother's lullaby, a baby's cry, snow falling, the silent woods, the stopping. Okay, yeah, I stole that from Robert Frost. Who cares? He's dead. Okay. This, I'm sure, has happened to you. It used to happen here quite frequently, but I think they must have all died off. It's called Saturday knockers. They come to the door early Saturday a.m. They know you're home. No use to skulk behind the blinds. Open the door, invite them in. Some drink coffee, some don't. When they're comfy and start unloading their pamphlets, pull out your poems. Start to read. Tell them, shh, shh, shh. Say, how'd you like that? Read another, and don't shut up for a minute. If they begin to pack up, rise. Tell them poetry can save their souls. Tell them they see us through a glass, darkly. Say, let some light in your life. Make it new. I'm addicted to list poems. They're so fun when you get started on them. The list keeps going of its own accord, and all you are is like the resident typist. And this is called a cure for the blank page phenomenon. You know, when you have to write a poem, you're in a workshop, you have to have a poem every week. Oh God, the pressure. List things you love, like not having to write a poem. List things you hate, like having to write a poem. List names for a hit list, but remember, they're watchers. List poets you love. This will be long, 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 but don't despair. List poets you hate. This may be longer, but don't despair. List things to do before you die. List things you've done so far. List your mother's rough list. List your father's final list. Think of years of typing, how you learned where the fingers went without looking. Think of years of reading, how you underlined with a yellow highlighter, ruining those books for resale. Think of school and how you loved it when someone thought you were smart. Think of school and how you hated it when someone thought you were smart. Think of the mystery novel you never finished writing. Think of the romance novel you never started writing. Think of the unfinished poems in a folder. Think of poems you've never written. Think of an article you might write. Perhaps a, and, or the, and done. Do not think that you need a haircut. Do not think of all your shortcomings. Do not list your longcomings. Do not think of the blank page before you. Do not think of what to have for dinner. Do not think of the book you left unread. Do not think of that cobweb waving above you. Do not think of things you need at the grocery store. Do not think of old poems you could disassemble. Do not think of phones. Do not think of a thought you can't recycle. Do not think of an email you must reply to. Do not think of ending a sentence with a preposition. Do not abhor adjectives. Do not think of semicolons or indeed colons. Do not think of your colonoscopy the night before when you prepared. Do not think of going to a second page. Do not think, period. Perhaps an exclamation point. Well, after going 2 or 3 months without a haircut, you probably appreciate the beauty parlor people more. I know I did. I just all got down on my knees and thank you. I had a Prince Valiant practically. I go to the Exclusively Yours beauty shop. And so at Exclusively Yours, this is an event that transpired one day. I just wrote it down. As a gender thing, when you're in the beauty parlor and they put tinfoil in your hair, you're getting it dyed, and apparently the tinfoil keeps the ends from getting too much dye in them, I think. I don't know. But guys probably don't dye their hair and don't know that. Anyway, at Exclusively Yours, a woman with enough tinfoil in her hair to pull in signals from space begins to sing along with WOLN, the golden oldies that play in the background of our lives. Give me that old time rock and roll that permeates the dryer's drawer and smiles break out. Jefferson Airplane comes on next. Grace Slick singing, don't you want somebody to love? Don't you need somebody to love? And we all join in. We know the lyrics to this one. The shampoo sink gurgles, the dryers hum back up. Lorraine conducts us with her brush. Eventually, combed out and beautiful, we pay up and leave the shop, a song in our hair. This one's for Shannon. She can fill in the blanks here, I think. The resident bartender. It's called Margarita. Late on summer afternoons, I like to sit on my back steps and watch the sun go down behind the barn. Clouds pluff their slow round toward the hills at the south. They put a glow on the weeds and tremble the brown-eyed Susans. The only sound is the silence of summer ringing in my ears, and then the honeyed voice of Jose Cuervo calling me inside, where he pays homage to his lover, the goddess of August. Her colors like an ear of corn, pale green and then gold. She stands by the fridge, a lime in one hand and a shaker of salt in the other. A few years back, I started to lose my hearing. Of course, I always blame my kids. Speak up, stop mumbling. I can't hear you, I can't understand you. Had the TV cranked so hard, they had to leave the room. But this is trying to capture that, how it slides away from you. Hearing voices. I hear the rise and fall, the tone, but the words are muffled, as if someone were speaking into a mask. And I can't quite grasp the meaning. Each consonant melting into another. P's and B's and V's. Which one? The sibilance of the S's, slide, he lied. The air has taken that sound, the crisp enunciation, stolen, flattened, like the odor of lilacs in July. What's left is mushy. The high pile of a 50s rug beaten down by traffic, sinking below understanding, like a copy of a copy of a copy, each less positive, flakes of carbon disintegrating in air. I spent some time in Japan, and while there I became addicted to haiku. People there assume haiku is poetry and poetry is haiku. There's not a distinction. So I have a couple of haikus. I can't go without reading one. And some are not haiku. They're more like what's called a senru, which is, well, haiku is defined because of its content. It's about nature, not that it's 575. And a senru is about human nature. So you can make that distinction if you like, or who cares? I can't hear you. The forsythia is shouting. That's my favorite spring haiku. When the forsythia bursts into bloom, it's wonderful. On the overpass, John loves Mary. The paint fading. Two black socks go into the dryer. One comes out. Thank you. The other one is, my GPS says, go right, but I lean left. I started recently, I've been cutting out newspaper clippings for years about women who are in deep trouble. I'm calling it dead ends. People said, oh God, get rid of that name. It's so depressing. But these lives are kind of depressing. Sometimes I read these over and I go, oh my God, what happened? And I don't know. So this one's called Running Water. 4 children, a cat, and 2 dogs were living with her in an apartment behind the empty storefront on Mill Street. There was no running water in the apartment. Someone reported her to social services. She is to appear in court Friday, charged with endangering the welfare of a minor. In the haiku, on Mill Street, the wheels grind exceedingly fine. My thought was, if she's living this hard up, why, who's going to pay the water bill? Whatever. Another one is Allegheny Cheerleader. Bleached bright, she strides along, leaning into the future on her high-heeled boots, blowing smoke which trails behind her like that 3-year-old child with rope-colored hair, what her mothers must have looked like. She's still wearing her blue satin jacket with Allegheny Cheerleader stitched on the back. Sometimes you happen to walk into a poem. Sometimes one passes you on the street. I'm going to end with a poem. It's called Walking the Dogs. My dogs have died, but it was my favorite pastime for years. I live about 2 blocks from the Allegheny River, and the dikes run along. And of course, you can walk on the top and you can let the dogs run free. No leash laws on the dikes. Walking the dogs. I walk to the river with the dogs, and there's nothing between us and the river. Nothing between us and the world. The river is covered with gold. A setting sun spreads like butter across the current. How did I get here? A cool rapture under my tongue. The song a bird sings alone in a forest. This world is so bright, I look askance. Let evening wrap around me. A duck splashes noisily upstream, leading the dogs away from her babies. A fish jumps from the water, the fly still alive in its mouth as it falls back into the ripple it made rising into the dense air. Gold sinks, the river goes on, the dogs splash in the shallows. Alive for the moment in the great maw of God, what can I do but let cool water seep through my fingers? Thank you all. You know, it's really weird reading without any sound coming back at you.
Thank you, Helen. That was wonderful.
Yeah, I really liked some of
It was
those.
beautiful. Yay.
Yay.
Like the Jose
We
Cuervo.
Turn on the
Well,
ball.
I love the color. Yeah, of course.
But it is very strange to not have even the breathing of the audience feeding back.
I know.
I
It's like,
I love it when we're all together in the room. Yeah,
Well, it'll happen.
it will.
I guess Nancy is our last, right?
Yep.
Yep.
Nancy's up.
Okay, I am going to unspotlight Helen, and I'm going to
Oh, no.
spotlight Nancy. This is really a nice feature that I looked it up on Google to see if I was getting it right, because I knew about pin, but I didn't know about spotlight. And there we are.
Hi, I want to thank Kathy and Linda for coming in to listen tonight. My friends, I'm going to start with a few poems on voice, the finding of one's voice. And the first poem is called The Voices that I'm going to read. And this poem came from after I was retired and after I had graded 10,000 papers. And
You get medal for that.
had my really, my life was, I was involved with many loved students and also raising a son, and had little time to write poetry. And during those years, and it was about finding that voice once again and watching bees during the act of writing. The voices. My bee and blossom voice hums in my wrist each morning, flies out over the field, bumbles through dust in the April wind, flies low to the apple trees to lose myself whole in each center. Each morning when I was 10, a voice spoke in my right leg as it swung the kickstand up. I became the gold words of motion circling in the cement yard, then breaking away to the earth of the park where hundreds of geese lifted together. That bicycle voice is a wise voice, tells me to keep moving, get back on and churn my thin beige tires after my left eyebrow splits open. Switch gears on the handlebar, feel for the easy uphill clicks in first, always coast downhill in second, still try to reach all the green lights in time. During the night, there is the other voice, the one that doubts its weightless bodies and tree of wings. But the bicycle voice says, the roads are familiar. And the bee blossom voice says, it will spill its spring language if I begin. Open, go in, go in. I grew up in a very Catholic environment and in New Jersey, and went to Catholic schools. And growing up, I had single aunts who lived upstairs from me. And I was very close to one of them, my Aunt Mary. I watched and felt, really loved her. She was quiet like me, and she was a gardener, and she was also a pretty religious woman. Later in my life, oddly enough, I became a gardener. This poem is addressed to her. Finding you. Aunt Mary, I never kept your worn book of novena prayers you thought I might need someday. I prefer your journal full of what you grew and how, what I have now in my hands. I always found you in your steaming garden, tying gold tomatoes, reseeding rows of lettuce, cutting blossoms on your knees. You took me by the hand to taste 3 kinds of basil, lemon balm, or to gaze at the forever rose. Was it there you found your voice? In the red impatiens, pastel swords of gladiolas, runner beans that poured? I remember when you began to raise it to your sisters, expecting you, the eldest, to rinse perspired blouses, scrub the china, I watched you leave their saucy dishes in sink water, trail their linen on the stairs. Tonight, Venus is brighter than any star. A cat surprises me as I dig a place for lavender. A deer eases into my field. I know I still need to trim the catmint to let it go, undo the irises, pull sorrel and thistle before I turn the desert soil. Begin. Back then, you showed me how to carry the basket lightly, full of squash and early girls, peaches and a sprig of rosemary up the back stairs for the others because you wanted to share the shine and scent of your offerings. But I have found the place inside myself that was also you, the tulip flame that loves its slippery tongue, its short life. I played the guitar for a long time. And then when I had my son and I was busy teaching, I had to decide in any free time I had whether I was going to continue playing the guitar or if I was going to spend time on poetry. And so this is about that. Guitar. I want to pick it up again, play a little Cat Stevens, Joni Mitchell, train myself again to sing in key, capo up, bloodlet against the strain of wild horses, ease into sunshine on my shoulders with John Denver in the garden, not looking over my shoulder to see if my neighbors are listening. I should just slip it out of its pillowcase in the fruit room and let my fingers ride the chords G, C, D, G, C, D, F, G. What was that song that took my pinky a month to callus up? I used to just pick it up and play in perfect rhythm, unleash my loud soprano for anyone I could get to listen, take it everywhere with me, ask for it to be marked fragile on planes. I might only get away now with a growl, like the leads in Morbid Angel, Pestilence, Napalm Death, Dismember, or Pungent Stench, some of my son's favorites. He still plays, but says he lacks the tremolo for death metal. His green electric usually cased under a stack of his photographs, abandoned buildings in which he appears double exposed like a naked star born among rifts of rubble. Sometimes I want Lennon to play Imagine for me on vinyl, Hendrix to shed his hat with purple haze, shed his vulnerable love of fame, but still pick strings with his teeth, light his guitar on fire and smash it, but not die that young. It surprises me now that most of my former listeners too are dead. Time humming along when I had them cornered in an incense-filled living room. Those old guitarists had hands like wild anemones. Some of those I used to love have voices hard to listen to, still cranking out albums, I guess because the frets still call and call them. Or else they broke their last string decades ago and became another self, never wanting to perform again, becoming instead a moon shadow. I'm thinking of Bob Dylan when I think of voices hard to listen to. I saw him perform not too long ago, and it was horrible. It was so bad. His band was good, though. I began writing the Worrier poems quite by accident, going into a notebook after retirement. And I saw questions I had in this old notebook, and I decided to answer them. This turned into a poem that I kind of liked, and it was called The Woman I Had Always Wanted to Be. Eventually, it became titled The Worrier, silent film star, and it led the way for me to write other poems called The Worrier, which are in my book, that ended up being called the Worrier poems. Every poem is called The Worrier, and then it has a subtitle. So I'll read you that first poem that I wrote, The Worrier Silent Film Star. Sorry. The Worrier Silent Film Star. Now that you are her, what will you do? I'll walk across the swinging bridge and light a clove cigarette. How will you roam? I'll drive a Packard convertible, my man in a long dark coat beside me. In the countryside, where will you land and what will you eat? We'll find a bar in northern Wisconsin. We won't eat. What are you wearing and what do you look like? An indigo dress, a little black cloche. I've outlined my lips to look like a sweet maroon bow. What songs will you sing? Heart of my heart, and I don't want to play in your yard. Who will know you better than anyone? My silk chemise. What undergarments do you wear? None. What do you wear instead? The plum. Why? Because it's a palm full of dusk. What word will you use? Flagrant. It's time for this. Where does the word go? It rises from under my bare feet when I leave the beach. What is strange about you now? There is nothing strange. What is common? I have loved the first light. Where does the light go? It goes under the letters and captions of what I say. Where does the scent go? It goes into my eyes, my mouth, the way I turn my head so that you will imagine lilacs. I'll read you another Worrier poem. This is called the Worrier poem, Fur Coat. When do you touch it? When I clear in my closet, it hangs in the back. Why do you keep it? My aunt worked hard at Ryerson Steel, saving for years to buy that coat. She let me wear it to work at Lord & Taylor. Why don't you wear it now? I would cringe in its warmth and softness. I think of burying it. When did you change? When I heard about the dirty farms and tiny cages, saw someone serrating the liver from a deer, watched a film of baby seals being clubbed on ice. What is the coat's purpose? Pride. A woman in a fur coat is supposed to look like a lioness, an heiress. What did you see at Lord & Taylor? Minks and foxes around my jewelry counter.